Hello, and welcome to the Joy of Cooking podcast. Each week, we set the table for a discussion about recipes and stories from the authors of The Joy of Cooking, kitchen victories and misadventures, and, most importantly, what we are cooking and eating right now. We're glad you've joined us at the table today. I'm Shannon Larson, home cook, ardent Joy of Cooking user and fan, and New York bagel enthusiast.
I'm Megan Scott, co-author of the 2019 edition of The Joy of Cooking. I'm a food editor by day and avoider of dish duty by night. And even though I'm a culinary professional, I ate frozen pizza for dinner last night.
Shh. I'm John Becker, fourth-generation co-author and steward of The Joy of Cooking, America's oldest family-run cookbook. And I think we should all be braising potatoes more. I guess a lukewarm take there to start us off with.
Explain the braising of potatoes.
I guess it started with pommes fondant. I think we did that over the holiday. And it was just like, man, this is so delicious. And we don't have it in the book. Pommes fondant is basically, you're taking like big, thick disc, like steak-like discs of russet potato. You are browning them in a skillet with maybe a flavorful rendered fat of some kind or just oil. You're browning them on both sides, kind of like you would, like if you were braising meat. And then you add a nice flavorful stock and you just like let that cook down until the potatoes get nice and silky tender.
God, that sounds so good.
Yeah.
Super.
It's fondant means melting or to melt in French. And so it's like a melty texture when the potatoes are done. They're so good.
We had kind of a Korean-ish dinner of sundubu jjigae. So we made this soy-glazed potato banchan where they're kind of braised and then they get reduced in a nice sweetened soy mixture.
We did it with sweet potatoes too after because we liked it so much and both were so good.
Yeah, braising potatoes.
All right, noted.
What about you, Shannon? What have you been cooking this week?
Let's see. We had a friend come over last Saturday for dinner, and he had been traveling all week, and so we did homemade Indian food and he was taking a red eye back to New York too. So I just was like, let's just like fill him up with vegetables. One of the things we did do this time was we just made our own paneer. And it's so easy to make your own paneer, and it's so much better. It's so much better than the store-bought stuff, at least like the stuff you can get at Whole Foods or not at like a specialty market. So I'm really proud of that. And we also made a big batch of congee this week that was with like crumbled tofu on top. And John, my husband, was a little bit sick, and so that was what he was going to.
Yeah, that's perfect for sick day food.
Yeah, it's great. What about you two?
Did you ever go to Boxer Ramen?
Yeah.
Do you remember their okonomiyaki tots?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we made okonomiyaki tots. So okonomiyaki is a Japanese like savory pancake made usually with cabbage and like a grated, it's a type of yam, but it's real sticky and gooey when you grate it. So it kind of helps hold everything together. This is okonomiyaki only in the sense of the toppings because it's literally just we bought some frozen tots and baked them and then topped them with Kewpie mayonnaise, the bulldog sauce, and then the katsuobushi, the fish flakes, and green onion.
Furikake.
Yeah, furikake. So that was just like a fun.
It's fun because it looks like it's like dancing too because the heat makes the fish flakes. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, we got the correct kind of katsuobushi that,
Nice.
Was really dancing on there. It was good. I tried to take a video. Didn't really work out, but, it's...
Yeah, we've got to work on our dimly lit kitchen. It's just not great for food photography. I'm in spring garden mode.
Yeah.
So I've been planting a bunch of stuff and getting the garden ready and starting seeds in the garage. So
It's so exciting.
yeah, it's so exciting. I'm so ready.
Me too.
It might be a little early actually, but
I think that it's not too early if your brain is just needing it.
Yeah.
You're fine.
This week, we'd like to welcome guest Cathy Barrow to the table. We're so excited to have you today, Cathy. Cathy is an award-winning author, a passionate knitter, gardener, and cook. She has written 4 cookbooks, Mrs. Wheelbarrow's Practical Pantry, Pie Squared, When Pies Fly, and Bagels, Schmears, and a Nice Piece of Fish. Cathy won an IACP award for Best Single Subject Cookbook for Mrs. Wheelbarrow's Practical Pantry and was nominated for a James Beard Award in the baking category for Pie Squared. For several years, she wrote a monthly preserving column for the New York Times and a monthly food column for the Washington Post. Cathy's work has been published by Serious Eats, Food 52, The Local Palate, Modern Farmer, Garden and Gun, Southern Living, NPR, and National Geographic. She retired a few miles north of Washington, D.C. with her husband Dennis and 2 rescued terriers. Cathy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I feel like the first time I became aware of your work was through Food 52 many, many years ago, probably early 2010s. That
Yes.
is so fun to remember because I remember they had such an active forum on the site that I used all the time. But yeah, your recipes have been with us for a long time.
Thank you. I loved Food 52, and it really was the first time that I found myself in a community of people who cooked with the same level of passion, insanity that I did. Like, I need to make this cake and it didn't work, so I'm going to make it 47 more
Right.
times until I get it down. And really, most of my friends thought I was insane, but there suddenly was this whole community of people who were like, "Yeah, I do that too," and
Right.
it was wonderful. It was really
Yeah.
great.
It's nice to not feel alone in that, like, I have to do this thing and I don't care if it takes me 50 times.
Right. And there are still so many recipes from those early days that I continue to make. The insanely addictive asparagus, I look
Mm.
forward to that every year. It's so good. It's just, got lemon zest and pancetta, and I can't even remember everything, but it's wonderful. And a Brussels sprout recipe. So I return to it over and over again.
Do you remember how the asparagus is cooked? Is it steamed or roasted or grilled?
It's in a skillet,
Oh,
so I
okay.
think that it's steamed in the skillet and then finished. It's just wonderful.
Nice. I'll have to look that one up this year. It's almost time for
Yeah,
asparagus.
I just wrote it
Right.
down.
I look it up every year when it's asparagus time, and then I make it until the asparagus is gone.
As a gardener, what are you up to right now in the garden? Are you prepping anything yet?
Oh my gosh, everything. I'm seeing all of my violas coming up, the ones that I planted last fall, and they're really getting vigorous and full of flowers, which is great. And all my daffodils are up and starting to bloom with all the succession. But in the vegetable garden, I have a removable greenhouse cover that fits over one of my raised beds. And so I put that up about a month ago, and I have all of my winter greens. I've got
Mm.
lettuce and spinach and bok choy and chard and kale all vigorously growing. Had my first salad three
Oh,
nights ago, so that was great.
lovely.
Yeah, and I seeded radishes, carrots, turnips, and arugula just the other day. So everything's coming. And I finally have some tulips. When we moved to this house 5 years ago, the first year I planted like 400 tulips, and the moles and voles and squirrels and rabbits ate every one.
Oh, no.
And then I decided I was going to figure that out and tried. Every year I've been trying. And this year I finally put huge cages over the area that I planted them and buried the cages so nobody could get under them. And I can't wait.
It's similar to oh, this cake didn't work the first time. I'm going to try 50 more
Yes.
times. With gardening, it's the same.
People have no idea why I would continue to plant tulips. I'm like, you don't understand. I need to have them. The other thing I did last week was plant all my potatoes. And I saw on Instagram that you're doing potatoes for the first time.
Yeah, I just planted some yesterday, so I'm really excited to see how they do.
I always plant them on St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, that's a fun tradition.
Yeah, I put some wire over I'm growing them in bags, so I put some chicken wire over the bags, not for other animals, but for cats.
Oh,
We
Oh,
have a
yes.
bunch of neighborhood cats and they love nothing more than fresh dirt. So I've got to protect
Yeah.
everything from cats.
Good move. We have rabbits, like a lot of them. And when we moved in here, a gardener walked by when I was building my first gardens, and she said, "Well, it's either a hawk year or a bunny year." And so I'm really waiting for a hawk year.
Yeah.
Come on. I planted Concord grapes because I read Aesop's Fable, and I'm like, bring it in, foxes. I want you. Yeah, I'm not feeling very fond of bunnies right now.
Yeah, they're cute from a distance. I like them, but not in my garden. I have kind of a niche question for you. So I was reading the introduction to Bagels, Schmears, and a Nice Piece of Fish and read that you might be a licorice fan. Do you
I
like
love licorice.
Are you a black licorice fan? Like what type?
I love the salty licorice the best.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so good. I think we're all on team licorice at the table.
such a minority thing though. Like it's,
I know.
So many people don't like it. I love it.
I love it.
More for us.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think they're being sold out there, but yeah, we should send you some Jacobson salt black licorice.
Oh my gosh, that must be
It
fantastic.
is so
It's
good.
excellent.
It's
Yeah, we'll send you a box.
Oh, thank you.
definitely my favorite.
So, this week, our theme is sourdough bread baking. And so, to get us into the mood to talk about sourdough, today on the tasting segment, we are going to have some sourdough bread with whipped feta and radishes and radish sprouts. So, the bread is from a local bakery called Ken's Artisan Bakery, and they make our favorite sourdough bread. So, our strategy for having fresh sourdough on hand all the time is Ken's makes these giant loaves. Do you remember how much they weigh?
I think it's a 3 kilogram boule.
Yeah, so that's about 7 pounds ish, or just under 7 pounds. And so what we do, because we don't live close to this bakery, so it's a special thing when we go. So we buy the giant loaf and then we cut it into quarters and then freeze the quarters, and it freezes super well.
It freezes really well.
So then we have bread for like a month, and it's lovely.
My husband bakes sourdough at home, and that's what we do. We bake 2 bowls at a time, right? And so we eat one through the week, and then we cut up the other one and freeze it. And then we have like a ton of sourdough in our deep freezer, which is great because if you want croutons or anything else, you just pull it out and then it's ready to go.
I love that.
Yeah.
Cathy, do you have a favorite local sourdough source, or do you make it yourself?
I make it myself. Back in 2020, when I was still writing for the Washington Post, I built my own sourdough starter from, the air. And that was very exciting. And I've kept it going. And I think I make 2 loaves probably every 2 weeks. And just this morning, I made cast off English muffins, which is another one of our real favorites, with a neighbor because she had been having some failures. So she came over, and I continue to be a cooking teacher even in retirement. So she came over and we made muffins together. They were really good. So I do that. And what else do I do a lot with my sourdough starter. I make waffles on the regular. I make crackers. So I like having it.
All this thinking about sourdough this week has made me want to restart our starter.
It should be brought back.
Have you ever dehydrated it?
I have never
No.
tried that.
So if you spread it out on a pan and put it in the dehydrator really low, you'll get these sort of flat sheets of starter, and you can keep it forever and then just rehydrate it and start it up again. It's kind of handy.
Oh, yeah.
That's so cool.
I feel like I was reading something, this was maybe a couple years ago, but I was reading something about how they found ancient sourdough starter, and then it was dried like on the inside of a container, and they were able to take it and make a new sourdough starter with it still after all this time.
That's so cool.
It's so cool.
That's really cool.
That's how I ship it to friends.
Oh,
Ship
that's
it.
such a good idea. What a nice gift to give somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kathy, does your starter have a name?
No, I feel really bad about that. I apologize every time. I never named it.
Let's talk about what we just tasted.
It's so good.
Yeah, I love this bread so much because the texture is always just so good. Like it's almost like it's moist.
Well, it also actually tastes a little sour, which is nice.
Yeah.
Like you can feel that in the back of your tongue kind of feeling, which sometimes you don't get when you get sourdough. I like it sour. It's my personal preference.
Yeah.
So also anything topped with radishes.
I know. Yeah, we went over to Shannon's house last night for cocktails and snacks, and there were radishes and butter on the
Always radishes and
table.
butter in my house.
So good.
Yeah, this bread is wonderful.
Sarah Marshall of Marshall's Hot Sauce here. Looking for a hot sauce that's a little different? Let me introduce you to Tortuga Gordo Fermented Hot Sauce, makers of the Good Food Award-winning Green Cobra and Rotten Jerk hot sauces out of Portland, Oregon. Tortuga Gordo is waiting for you in the refrigerator section of Market of Choice, New Seasons, and your local co-op or bodega. Or find them online at www.tortugagordo.com. That's TORTUGAGORDO.com. They're not with the other hot sauces because they're not like the other hot sauces.
So let's talk briefly about the recipe we made last week for Joy Scouts. So we made frijoles de la olla. John, do you want to talk about kind of how we use them over the course of a week?
Yeah, so we did just like the basic frijoles de la olla recipe with some Domingo Rojo beans from Steve at Rancho Gordo. usually for cooking like tacos, or in this case, where it was kind of an excuse really to fire up the grill and make some carne asada and to serve with. We did, I guess it would be frijoles borracho, drunken beans. Usually those have like a ton of meat in them as well. But yeah, we just start off with like this, kind of a lazily fried sofrito of onions, Challah chilies or poblanos, and smashed garlic cloves. Make sure that gets nice and maybe not browned, but just concentrated and nice and soft. Just add the beans. I think it was about a quart of beans with some of the liquid, depending on what we have. Usually it's a pretty big can, a tall boy can of Mexican lager. Bring that to a simmer with halved dried chipotle, usually a morita chili, dried Mexican oregano. Epazote, if we have it, and yeah, for sure a bay leaf in there. But yeah, just cook that down until it's the consistency you want. Sometimes, we like to serve that in a bowl, so just kind of have it more of a soupy consistency. And then a lot of the time, if we're topping tostadas or something, I'll really cook it down.
And kind of mash it up a
yeah,
bit.
mash it with a potato masher.
Yeah. I come from bean people, so I could eat.
Every time you say that, it's so funny.
I could eat beans every day, which we don't do because of, digestive problems. But I could absolutely eat them every single day. I grew up, my grandmother every weekend would make a big pot of, she called them October beans, but they were just borlotti or cranberry beans. They were like a soupy style, actually called Appalachian pot beans, but it's really just a very simple way of cooking them with maybe she would add some ham hock or something. Salt, and that was pretty much it. But they make their own kind of gravy. I don't know. They're just so rich and delicious, and we would always have it with cornbread. And then there would be like chow chow or some kind of pickle on the table that you would eat with the beans. And so, yeah, I could eat them every day. I love them so much. But this week's recipe, since we're talking about bread, we're not going to make everybody do sourdough. That seems like a lot to ask for one week. I think everyone should read the section on sourdough in Joy of Cooking because we added it new in this edition and we're really proud of it. And this was during a period, I said I don't do sourdough now, but I did do sourdough baking a lot. It's just I think it's a really fun section to read. This week's recipe is going to be the Dill Batter Loaf, which is on page 600. It's kind of between a quick bread and a yeast bread because it has it's more of a batter than a dough, but it is yeasted. And it's got green onion, dill, cottage cheese, and buttermilk. So it's like savory and rich and soft and lots of dill. So that is going to be our Joy Scouts recipe of the week. So please cook along with us and let us know what you think. You can tag us on Instagram at The Joy of Cooking and show us what you're baking. Okay, Cathy, what is your relationship with the joy of cooking?
When I moved into my first apartment, I was just 18. I was taking some time off from school and working at a pancake house, just to give you a sense of my beginnings in food. But my mother sent me a box with The Joy of Cooking, the New York Times cookbook, and Julia Child, Mastering the Art. And that was how she felt I should start my kitchen.
Aww.
And once I got into college, my best friend taught me lemon bars out of the Joy book. And it has been a recipe that I make over and over and over again. And while I used Joy for everything for the longest time, I think that my strongest relationship has to do with baking, ginger snaps, lemon bars, lemon meringue pie, a few things like that, and also sauces. I remember very distinctly spending time learning how to make all the sauces in the book, cheese sauce and white sauce, and just wanting to make sauces. So those are my relationships. I have 3 copies.
Oh, lovely.
I have my grandmother's 1943 edition.
Beautiful.
The one my mother gave me, which is, of course, that one.
The 75.
And then yours.
75, our bestseller.
Yes. And we do have a connection through Maria Cornicelli on that one, who was my first editor.
Yeah.
So you don't have a 1997 edition? I can't believe it.
I don't.
Weird.
I feel really bad. But that's my Joy collection, and I do still reach for it on the regular. It's got great details, great information. It's like, without Joy, where would my kitchen be?
I love that so much. Which edition do you pull down the most?
I've been pulling the new one down more frequently because I feel compelled. Like, I know you guys. I want to be
Yeah.
supportive. I want to see what's happening. But when I go to make my lemon bars, I go back to the 75
Yeah.
because it just falls right open there. I don't even have to look for the page.
We
So yes,
recently we do keep a copy of Joy in our kitchen because we it's just a good reference, and we also want
yeah.
to see if is there anything we want to change, or did we miss something or goof somewhere. So but we just swapped out our kitchen copy because it got so encrusted with the food that it was actually kind of disgusting. I was like, I don't think we can use this anymore. I don't think it's safe to have this in the kitchen. So I wanted to ask you some bagel questions
Excellent.
because I love that cookbook so much. How did you become
Thank you.
interested, first of all, in making bagels at home?
An essential part of my kitchen activity is learning to make anything I can by myself and not having to purchase it. I
Hmm.
think that that's the the crux. Bagels, you could not get a good bagel for the longest time. And I had this relationship with bagels through my grandmother in Boston, who would fly to us in Ohio with a hat box filled with bagels on the regular. And the smell of them and just that experience, and also my mother's joy in receiving this great bread. I've always loved a bagel. And when I traveled to New York a lot, it was the first thing I did and the last thing I did, always. And I became obsessed with trying to make my own. And there weren't a lot of recipes out, and I just kept fiddling around, and I had everything wrong. But I tried bringing water back from New York City because I thought that was the answer. But really, the answer was the flour, which is a high gluten flour. And I didn't know that existed until, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe.
Hmm.
The Washington Post published a recipe and it was good. And I was like, wow, these are really good bagels. But I felt that there were some things about that recipe that could be improved. It made just too many. There were aspects of it that were missing, like the weight and
Mm.
timing. And so I started to think about not just providing recipes for bagels, all the flavors, even ones that I personally would never order, but just making a full book. And also all the other aspects of bagel culture, the
Hmm.
schmears, the smoked and cured fish, the salads, all of that. And the idea came to me sort of full blown. And I got the book deal on March 13th of 2020, which lives in infamy
Hmm.
as the
Wow.
day that we all stopped seeing people. So I then spent the next 6 months making bagels, like lots of them. You
Hmm.
know what it's like to test for a cookbook. I was putting out 3 or 4 dozen bagels a day
Wow.
sometimes, and I knew nobody in the town that we had just
Oh
moved to.
no.
Literally no one. And it wasn't like you could go knocking on people's door because
Right.
it was COVID. So I began this process of packing up the bagels and shipping them by flat rate boxes to my friends in DC because I hate waste. So I mean, here, take some bagels. Till they stopped, they begged me not to do that anymore. So, but it was a good way to spend 6 months of 2020. That's what
Yeah,
I
that's
can
in a
say.
way that's perfect
Yeah.
timing.
Right.
Did not wanting to waste and having so many bagels around it, did that influence your decision to keep the yield so low for that book? Or was it just,
No, I really felt that, first of all, a fresh bagel is the only bagel. I mean, leftover bagels don't make it for me. I freeze them now, and I know this. I have this process of taking them whole from the freezer, putting them in a 350 oven for 10 minutes, and they come out as though I had just baked them. But at the time, I was like, I do not want more than six. There's two of us. Six is the perfect number.
Hmm.
And also, it fits on a 9 by 13 quarter sheet
uh,
pan, which fits in the refrigerator more easily. Many people have small refrigerators. I mean, it's just easier.
Hmm.
I've always tried to write my books with a consciousness of people's kitchen size, family size, all of that. Even my preserving books, going back to the yield on my jams, it was 4 or 5 jars, not 12 or 15,
Hmm.
because it's two of us. We could never get through 5 different kinds of jam, 12 or 15 jars of
Right.
each. So
You're not always putting up a bumper crop of tomatoes or what have you.
no,
Yeah.
I have a third of an acre. I mean, I don't live on a farm.
Kathy,
Yeah.
my husband was just in New York for work, and the one thing I requested that he bring back were bagels, and that's what he did right before he went to JFK. Was he got a bunch of bagels, and I just had one this morning, and now I'm going to use your tip on warming it up, which is helpful. But he also is the baker in the family, but he's been really nervous about trying it at home for some reason, and I'm not quite sure why. But do you have any suggestions for people who are feeling like they need a little bit of confidence to try baking bagels, or any recommendations on how to actually do it?
Yeah, I've always had a theory that people have 3 ways of learning. They either read or they watch or they do. And so I try to make my instructions as precise as possible. And I think in the bagel book they are, even up to if you start at 7 o'clock at night, then you're going to want to bake it, this hour of the morning, and sort of putting a timeline together. But I also have a very ignored and small YouTube channel that has critical video on how to make bagels. So maybe that will be
That's a
helpful.
great.
Also, it's just flour. I mean,
Yeah.
We'll be sure to put a link to that YouTube in the notes for the episode.
thank you.
So I know you make your own bagels famously, but if you're going to a really good bagel shop, and you want to buy a dozen bagels, what does your order look like?
6 everything and a few others for my husband.
What is your husband like?
Sesame primarily,
Mm-hmm.
or plain. Yeah.
Okay.
My husband is a very picky eater and a
Okay.
vegetarian as well. And so it's been 25 years of bringing him along slowly, but there are some things he just wants nothing to do with. Everything spice is one of them.
Oh, we usually get a dozen everything. That's our typical order for bagels.
Yeah.
Are you on Team Caraway when it comes to your everything blend, or
Personally, yes, but when I'm making for a crowd, no,
Mm.
because it really separates the meek from the strong.
I'll remember that. I like that. You also have a bagel in your book that I have never tried, which is an egg bagel. Can you talk a little bit about what egg bagels are?
Egg bagels were very prevalent when I was growing up. You see fewer of them now, and they were sort of bright yellow and kind of bizarre. To me, it's like challah shaped like a bagel.
Mm-hmm.
But I know some people truly love that rich, eggy, sweet flavor. It's very different. It has a different crust, a different crumb, but it can be very delicious with certain foods. I like an egg bagel with sardines. It's really good.
Ooh.
It's like
Okay.
the sweetness and the salty and the brine. It's nice.
Adding that to my bucket list, my food bucket list. I'm going to shift gears a little into canning and preserving because I didn't want to
Sure.
neglect that subject. But for us, we kind of mark the seasons by canning specific things. Like we always make our apricot jam when the apricots are really good, and we always do apple butter in the fall. What are your must-do canning projects every year?
Well, I can tell you that March is when I use everything that I made last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been like afraid to use because what if I run out of it? And so I've been deep into the tomatoes this month. I made tomato soup. I made enchiladas last night. I'm just like using the tomatoes. And I am looking forward to asparagus because I will pickle asparagus. I use those in Bloody Marys during the summer. It's really a nice addition. And small onions when they come in, the really baby ones, I like to pickle those for cocktails. So I'm looking forward to pickling those things and then to seeing the first strawberries, and I'll do strawberry jam. But I usually do strawberries with mango because the mango provides enough pectin to make it sturdy without additional pectin. And the combination of the two flavors is really nice, especially if you can get those champagne mangoes or whatever they're called now, honey mangoes.
Yeah. So is that recipe in your book?
I think that's in the New York Times.
Okay. I'll look for it. That sounds delicious. And I actually didn't realize that mangoes had a lot of pectin, but
Yes.
They
that's
do.
fascinating.
I don't like to use commercial pectin. I'm just funny about it. I don't feel that there's any need. If you cook right and you do, I just have a few tricks, macerating taking the juices out and bringing them up to 220 degrees and then adding your fruit so it doesn't cook for very long.
Mm-hmm.
And also being open-minded to jams that aren't thick like we're used to, but a little bit runnier, which works with yogurt really nicely.
Those champagne mangoes make one of my favorite jam. I do that every year. Get a box or two of them from the store, and it's just such a good jam on its own too. Those are great.
There's a mango chutney recipe on Food 52 that I developed that is also really lovely at this time of year with those mangoes.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, using champagne mangoes as opposed to like grating apple for for the pectin definitely sounds like.
The other thing that works is kiwi.
Oh, okay. And I bet that blends in really nicely.
It does. You get those little black seeds, but with strawberries, you don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
And it has, kiwis don't actually have that strong a flavor. It's more like a citrus or just an acidic bite that is very pleasant.
Excellent tip. So do you just chop them up or do you blend them? How do you incorporate?
Just chop them up and cook them, and they break down.
Oh, that's great to know. I love kiwi too.
Yeah.
It's delicious.
Let's try it. Cathy, before we move on to the next segment, where can our listeners follow you?
Instagram, Blue Sky. That's about it these days. I'm kind of slowing down on my social media activities.
Yeah, I mean, same.
Sounds nice and healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm trying.
And you should definitely buy at least one of Cathy's books. I really love the preserving book, Mrs. Wheelbarrow's Practical Pantry, and then the bagel book, Bagels, Schmears, and a Nice Piece of Fish. They're excellent books, and you should check them out.
Thank you.
Also, I just love the titles. All of the titles are so
good.
fun.
I will always remember teaching a class with the Mrs. Wheelbarrow book when they misprinted the cover sheet and it said Mrs. Wheelbarrow's Practical Panties.
Are you serious?
I am. And so every time somebody says it out loud, I'm like, please
God.
pronounce all the consonants.
Wow. Okay. I
Yeah.
have to recover from that.
Yes.
All right. Each week we choose a topic to tackle based on caller questions. And this week we're talking about sourdough bread.
Hi, I'm calling for the Joy of Cooking podcast. My name is Haley. I'm a huge foodie and lover of all things bread. I found myself looking for a food podcast at the beginning of this year, 2025, and I stumbled upon the Joy of Cooking, and it's been an absolute dream to listen to. I want to know everything you all know about bread, specifically sourdough and sourdough starters, but I'm also very curious about more straightforward and delicious loaf making for beginners. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Haley. This is a very large topic to cover in 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to have to hit the highlights. And like Cathy was saying earlier, you know, a lot of people learn by just doing the thing. And I think that with bread, especially sourdough, you just have to kind of do it and try stuff. And then you eventually do get a feel for what it should look, feel, smell like. Because it's not like most recipes where you mix some things together, you have predictable results in a predictable amount of time. It really varies depending on how cold it is, how active your starter is. But my biggest advice after saying all of that is don't overthink it, because I feel like there's so much sourdough lore out there that is not super helpful. And it can be really, I remember being really intimidated by making a sourdough starter, because I would read these books and it was like, well, you need to have a heating mat for your sourdough starter, and you need to here's the time, like start it at 6 p.m. and then do this at 8. And I think that felt stressful to me. I'm going to tell a story that's kind of funny, but years ago, we were able to meet Samin Nosrat at her home, and she is very lovely. She's as lovely as she seems. But we were talking about making bread, and I was telling her that I really fell in love with the tartine sourdough bread recipe, because it was the first recipe that I was like, oh, I can totally do this. The way they described making the bread was so freeing. It was kind of like, you can just eyeball the flour and the water that you add to your starter. Don't worry too much about it. And then it would, they talked about to know when the sourdough starter is ready, like when it rises and falls predictably, like every day, and it kind of looks the same. That's when you know it's good to use for bread. And for some reason, that just clicked with me. Also, the recipe has a ton of pictures, which is super helpful. But I told that to Samin, and she laughed so hard because she was like, Megan, that is a 20-page recipe. And I was like, but it's all photos. It's mostly photos.
That's the one my husband still uses.
Yeah.
Like that's his go-to, the tartine. I mean, again, we're talking about pages of books that are like crusty and gross.
Yeah.
It's like that 20 pages. Those are disgusting, but it's used all the time. The pictures are so helpful.
They are so helpful to see what it looks like, and the stretching, because that recipe uses a stretching and folding process. So you're not kneading it, but you do every once in a while, you pull the dough and you stretch it and then fold it over, which was a new technique to me. And so seeing it demonstrated, it was just really, really helpful. In terms of other advice, I mean, I think you should read the sourdough section in Joy of Cooking, which it is pretty inspired by the tartine method and recipe, just because there's no kneading. It's a lot more hands-off than I ever thought bread baking could be, and the loaves turn out really well. Like, I distinctly remember making my first loaf from that recipe, and when it came out of the oven, I could not believe it. I was almost freaked out. It was so good. And it looked like, a crusty sourdough loaf. It was beautiful. So, but a couple of other tips for sourdough baking. So like I said, when you're feeding your starter, don't think too hard about the measurements. Like add some flour, add some water until it is kind of a loose, like almost pancake batter consistency. And then, when it starts to rise and fall every day in a predictable way, so that at roughly the same time of day you're feeding it, it's ready to bake bread. And then to know the starter is really ready and really active, if you take a spoonful and drop it in some water, it should float because it should be full of air bubbles. So it should float in water. Other than that, I feel like it's really just something you have to make and try it out. And you're probably going to have some failures, and that's okay.
I think that's the best way to learn how to bake bread, though. I feel like the times where we quote unquote failed with our bread baking, we learned tons about when we should be baking or what the starter should look like. So I think just being comfortable if it just doesn't turn out the way you want it to a couple of times. We still sometimes, like, because it's too cold or whatever, it will be dense, and sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's okay too.
I feel like sourdough is a kind of a funny area of baking just because a lot of it is, as you say, like I'm sure some people could be weighing things out to the gram for their starters and whatnot, and that's what's so intimidating. But it definitely seems like an intuitive thing that you kind of have to read your starter, like you say. And that's kind of at odds with the accuracy and precision that baking, has a reputation at least for requiring.
I will say when I first made my starter, I did weigh the water and the flour every time until I learned what the correct consistency was. Because when you're starting out, you just don't know what it's supposed to look like. And so I did weigh it. And then once I kind of got the hang of it, I was like, okay, I can stop weighing now and just add the flour and water until it looks right. But yeah, it's like a combination of a precise baking technique and kind of voodoo magic.
Well, yeah, it's kind of reminded me of the discussion we had with Julia Skinner about fermentation recipes and how just by their very nature, they require a lot more intuition than your normal white sauce recipe or what have you.
Yeah. Cathy, do you have any advice on sourdough baking for our listener?
I used the tartine recipe for a long time, and I used the book and I would have it right in front of me and turn the pages and look at the pictures, and it always made me nervous. I know it's a really excellent recipe and I made good bread from it, but it felt daunting. Like I had to plan a day. And I was sent, at some point, I was sent the New World Sourdough, I think it's called, by Brian Ford. And it is a very simplified way of thinking about sourdough. And that recipe has stuck with me. It has a levain that you make ahead. And that levain, I think, really helps my bread get some lift and have some life. And then the other piece of advice is if you think it's been in the refrigerator getting ready to bake long enough, add 2 hours. It needs
Okay.
a lot of time. People don't really know. Like when I tell people, if you want to learn to make sourdough, you need to plan 2 or 3 days for each loaf. That's just like what you do. It's a mistake to bake it too early. That's when I get those very dense loaves that become croutons or breadcrumbs or something like that. That's my best advice. And don't get too worked up about making designs on the top.
Right.
That's really going to take too much mental energy. Just get a razor blade and slash it.
Yeah. I still struggle with that, even though I've had a lot of practice, like doing the razor blade thing. But I aspire. And I liked what you said about, the tartine recipes felt daunting to you. So you found one that made more sense, which is really great advice. Like if you read a recipe and it just is not, you're not getting it, or it feels scary or intimidating, there's probably another one out there that is a better approach. And it just depends on your personality
and like how you learn. And
yeah, exactly.
And there's actually not much difference between the one that Brian makes and the tartine one. It's also a folding one and all that. But for some reason, the language in it and the simplified instructions really work for me.
I love that. Thank you for that recommendation. And in terms of just yeast bread baking, John, I feel like you should talk about the tangzong.
Oh, right. That is something special. The tangzong, it's also called flour roux, another way that I've heard it. But yeah, you basically are just...
You're just making a thick roux, and then you cool it down and add it to the dough.
Right. And then it ends up hydrating some of the flour, and you end up with like a really nice kind of dense but fluffy crumb.
And it also, I think that keeps it from staling. I think that the tangzong keeps it really moist and fresh tasting for days. That's just a really nice loaf because it's pretty, I feel like it's fairly straightforward to make. And when it comes out of the oven, it is beautiful. Like it's just golden and big. And I don't know, it's a very satisfying and good loaf of bread for sandwiches and things like that.
I kind of want to make this week.
Yeah, you should try it.
Good.
As long as there are eggs around, I'm making challah on a regular basis too, because that's a great bread to have. It's great in the freezer. It's French toast. It's everything wonderful.
And I feel like challah always turns out beautifully as well. Like it's just an impressive, gorgeous bread.
Even if you can't braid, the braids look okay. Once it's all glazed and puffy and beautiful, it looks good.
If you have a topic, ingredient, or joy story to share, call our hotline at 503-395-8858. Leave us a message or send us a text. We'd love to hear from you. And next week's topic comes from our caller.
This is Ashley calling from Denver. Thank you for your wonderful podcast. It has quickly become my favorite. My question is about cooking for a 12-year-old who loves sushi. He also really likes ramen and noodle dishes, but I'm looking to expand his horizons a little more, and especially to incorporate more vegetables into the Asian spectrum of foods we eat. So it seems like you have a lot of ideas about using different vegetables, and if you have any recipes for not stir fries, but noodles, I would love to hear them. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that question, Ashley. I'm really looking forward to answering it. Food for an adventurous 12-year-old.
I love it.
Yeah. All right. So what are we doing this week, everybody? What are you excited about cooking?
We got some fioretto, which is a type of cauliflower from a market here in Portland called Providor. The produce comes from this place called Rubinette, and I've never had it before. And we are going to cook it tonight. We didn't cook it last night. I know we asked you, but we ended up getting a pizza from Vincenzo's.
Oh, great minds. Well, we had a frozen pizza, but
it looks beautiful, and we're gonna pair it with some salmon and some Brussels sprouts, kind of simple meal. And then we make our own chicken stock. We just put everything in the freezer, like veggie bits and chicken bits and stuff. But we used the carcass from Samin's buttermilk chicken for the stock last week, and the stock is so good. And I know it's going to be like false spring again here in Portland, but I'm going to make soup. I just have to.
Yeah.
I just wanted the stock. If you ever make Samin's buttermilk chicken recipe, use the carcass, make a stock. It's so rich. It's so beautiful.
That sounds good. I'm going to come over and have some of that soup.
Okay.
It's John's birthday this week on Tuesday. So happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Woohoo.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Joy of Cooking podcast. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by subscribing to the show and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. Follow us at joyofcooking.substack.com and on Instagram at thejoyofcooking. Stay tuned for next week, where we will talk about veggie-forward dishes for an adventurous 12-year-old. And don't forget to make this week's recipe Dill Batter Loaf on page 600 of the 2019 edition. Call in with questions, hopes, history, or where you find joy in the kitchen. Our number is 503-395-8858. That's 503-395-8858.
And we could not do this without our fantastic team at the Joy of Creation production house. Thank you to Dave Drusky, our production coordinator, Haley Bowers, our audio engineer, and Sarah Marshall, our producer.